The widow's reckoning. The auctioneer's hammer hung in the air like an executioner's blade, and Martha Hale stood on that platform knowing the whole town had come to watch her fall. 300 pounds of shame in a flour sack dress, they'd called her. The widow who couldn't keep her man alive or her farm running. Now Victor Crowell stood below, smiling that politician's smile, ready to take everything she had left. The crowd's laughter cut deeper than any knife. She'd lost her husband, her dignity, her hope, but she hadn't lost yet. Not quite. What happened next would change Red Hollow forever. If you want to see how Martha Hale reclaimed everything they tried to take from her, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning started the way shame always does, with everyone watching. Martha Hale had known this day was coming for 3 months. Ever since the bank notice arrived with its cold language about foreclosure proceedings and debt satisfaction. She'd read it 17 times, hoping the words would change. They never did. Her husband Thomas had been dead 2 years, taken by pneumonia one brutal winter, and the farm had been dying slowly ever since. A woman alone couldn't work 100 acres, couldn't manage irrigation rights, couldn't haggle with suppliers who saw her coming and doubled their prices because what was she going to do about it? Now she stood in her bedroom, Thomas's bedroom, their bedroom, and tried to find something to wear to her own execution. The black dress from his funeral hung in the wardrobe like a ghost. She'd worn it once and sworn never again, but what else did she have? The Sunday dress with the torn hem, the work dress stained with chicken feed and garden dirt. In the end, she chose the black dress because at least it was honest. At least it said what everyone already knew. Martha Hale was a woman defined by loss. She pulled it on with shaking hands, the fabric strained across her shoulders, her breasts, her belly. Thomas used to love her body, used to pull her close at night and whisper that she was perfect, soft and warm and his. But Thomas was dead, and the rest of the world had different words for what she was. Fat, pathetic, useless. She braided her dark hair with fingers that wouldn't quite steady, pinned it at the nape of her neck, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. 42 years old, round face, brown eyes that used to spark with something like joy, now just tired. So damn tired. The walk into town took an hour. She could have hitched the wagon, but the bank had already claimed the horses, said they were assets that would be liquidated to satisfy creditors. Fancy words for stealing a widow's last means of transportation. So she walked, the October sun beating down on her shoulders, dust rising with each step, and tried not to think about the fact that by sunset she'd be walking this road with nowhere to go. Red Hollow came into view just after noon, a scatter of buildings along the valley floor where Widow's Creek met the Snake River. Population maybe 300 on a good day. The kind of town where everyone knew your business before you did, where your failures became entertainment over Sunday dinner, where a woman alone was either pitied or scorned and sometimes both at once. The auction platform had been erected in the town square, right in front of the land office. A cruel touch, that, making her stand where Thomas had once filed their claim, where they'd signed papers with hope in their hearts and plans for the future. Now those plans were about to be sold off piece by piece to whoever had cash in hand. People were already gathering. Martha saw Agnes Coldwell from the general store, whispering behind her hand to Prudence Marsh. She saw the Kincaid brothers, hard men who ran cattle and had made offers on her land before, offers that came with leering suggestions about what else they might take in trade. She saw Reverend Parks with his thin wife, both wearing expressions of pious sorrow that barely masked their satisfaction. After all, Martha had stopped coming to church after Thomas died. Stopped pretending that prayers made any difference when your whole world collapsed around you. And she saw Victor Crowell. He stood near the platform in a tailored suit that cost more than most families earned in a year. Crowell was maybe 50, silver-haired and handsome in that polished way that spoke of money and power. He served on the town council, owned the biggest saloon in Red Hollow, had a hand in half the businesses along Main Street. He smiled when he saw her, a warm expression that never quite reached his pale blue eyes. "Mrs. Hale," he said, tipping his hat. "Terrible business, this. Just terrible." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Crowell had been the one to help her after Thomas died. He'd offered loans, introduced her to merchants, arranged for seasonal workers. And somehow, despite all that help, she'd ended up deeper in debt. The numbers never quite added up, but what did she know about finance? She was just a farm wife, too grief-stricken and stupid to understand that kindness always came with a price. The auctioneer climbed onto the platform, a thin man named Pettigrew who worked for the land office and clearly hated his job today. His Adam's apple bobbed as he cleared his throat. "Folks, let's get started. We're here to satisfy outstanding debts owed by Mrs. Martha Hale, widow of Thomas Hale, deceased. Property includes 120 acres, farmhouse, barn, equipment, livestock, and associated water rights to Widow's Creek." Martha's stomach turned. Water rights. Thomas had been so proud of those, had fought the land office for 2 years to get them recognized. The creek ran through their property before joining the river, and in Wyoming territory that meant everything. Water was life. Water was power. Control the water, control the valley. She'd never understood why Thomas cared so much. Now, standing here, she wondered if he'd known something she didn't. "Step up here, please, Mrs. Hale." The platform creaked under her weight. She felt every eye on her, felt the judgment in those stares. How had she let it come to this? What kind of woman couldn't hold on to what her husband built? The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down her spine, making the black dress cling to her body. "We'll start with the livestock," Pettigrew announced. "Chickens, 12 laying hens, and 1 rooster." The bidding began. It was quick, brutal, efficient. Her chickens went to Agnes Coldwell for $3. The plow and harrow went to the Kincaids for $25. The furniture, Thomas's desk, the bed they'd shared, the rocking chair he'd made with his own hands, sold for pennies to strangers who'd burn it for firewood or let it rot in their barns. Each sale felt like losing Thomas all over again. Each item carried memories, him writing by lamplight at that desk, his strong hands shaping wood into something beautiful, his voice low and content as they sat together in the evening. All of it reduced to dollars and cents, scattered to people who didn't care, who'd never know what those objects meant. Then Pettigrew's voice changed, took on a note that made Martha's skin prickle. "Now for the main property, 120 acres with improvements, including full water rights to Widow's Creek, as recognized by Territorial Survey of 1881, opening bid set at $300. A murmur ran through the crowd. 300 was low, insultingly low. The land alone was worth twice that, and the water rights tripled the value. But Martha was in no position to object. She was drowning, and they were offering her a stone instead of a rope. 300, called out Marcus Kincaid, grinning at his brother. 350, someone else offered. The bids climbed slowly. 400, 450, 5. Martha watched the numbers rise and felt nothing. What did it matter? Whether her life sold for 500 or 5,000, she'd still be homeless by nightfall. Then Crowell stepped forward. $1,000, he said clearly. Cash, paid today. The crowd went silent. 1,000 was more than fair. It was generous, almost suspiciously so. Pettigrew looked confused, glancing at the papers in his hand as if they might explain this sudden charity. Martha looked at Crowell and saw something flicker in his expression, satisfaction, triumph. The look of a man who'd just won a long game. "Any other bids?" Pettigrew asked weakly. Silence. "Going once? Going twice?" "Wait." The voice came from the edge of the crowd, low and rough as stone grinding on stone. Everyone turned. Martha's breath caught. A man stood there, or maybe a mountain had taken human form and decided to walk among mortals. He was easily 6.5 feet tall, built like he'd been carved from the high country granite, with shoulders broad enough to carry the world. His hair was dark and shaggy, his beard untrimmed, his buckskins worn and weathered. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the stares. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, were fixed on the platform. On her. "That's Rowan Pike," someone whispered. "What's he doing down from the mountains?" Martha had heard the name. Everyone in Red Hollow had. Rowan Pike was a legend, a ghost story. A warning parents gave children about what happened when you went too far into the wilderness. He lived somewhere up in the high country, trapped furs, appeared in town maybe once a year to trade and then vanished again. Some said he was crazy. Others said he was dangerous. Most just said he was better left alone. He walked toward the platform with steps that seemed to shake the ground. The crowd parted like water before a stone. When he reached the front, he pulled out a worn leather pouch and dropped it on the auction table with a heavy thud. 1,200, he said. In silver. Pettigrew fumbled with the pouch, spilled coins across the table. They gleamed in the sunlight, real silver dollars, more money than most people in Red Hollow saw in a year. Crowell's smile had frozen on his face. Now see here, you got a higher bid? Rowan's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. He still didn't look at Crowell, didn't look at anyone but Martha. This is irregular, Crowell said tightly. The woman has debts all over town. Then I'll pay those too. Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out another pouch. Whatever she owes, name it. Pettigrew was counting frantically. Mrs. Hale's outstanding debts total, approximately $600, including interest and fees. Here's $800. Another pouch hit the table. That cover it? The auctioneer looked like he might faint. Sir, the procedure. The procedure is I'm paying her debts, buying her land, and this auction is done. Rowan finally turned to look at Crowell. Unless you got a problem with that, Councilman. The two men locked eyes. Martha felt the tension like electricity before a lightning strike. Crowell was powerful, connected, used to getting his way through money and influence and carefully applied pressure. But Rowan Pike didn't seem to care about any of that. He stood there like a force of nature, immovable and unconcerned with the rules of civilized society. After a long moment, Crowell smiled thinly. Of course not. Just surprised to see you taking an interest in town affairs, Mr. Pike. You're usually so reclusive. Times change. Rowan turned back to Pettigrew. We done here? Yes, I suppose. If the debts are paid and the bid is highest. The auctioneer was shuffling papers desperately, trying to find some regulation that applied to this situation. He found nothing. Sold to Mr. Rowan Pike for $1,200. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Martha stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. One moment she'd been watching her life dissolve into nothing. The next, this stranger, this mountain of a man she'd never spoken to, had bought it all back. But why? What did he want? Rowan climbed onto the platform with 2 heavy steps. Up close, he was even more imposing. Martha barely reached his shoulder. His face was weathered and scarred, marked by years in the wild, but his eyes held something she hadn't expected. Gentleness. He shrugged off his heavy coat, bearskin she realized, lined with wool, and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her, warm and smelling of pine smoke and open sky. You're under my protection now, he said quietly. Nobody takes what's yours. Then he offered his arm like she was a lady at a dance instead of a broken widow on an auction block. Martha stared at that arm, at the scars on his knuckles, at the strength in his frame, and made a choice. She took it. They walked off the platform together. The crowd parted silently, faces showing everything from shock to confusion to anger. Crowell watched them go with an expression carved from ice. At the edge of town, a massive bay horse waited, bigger than any Martha had ever seen, with hooves the size of dinner plates. Rowan lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, then swung up behind her. Where are we going? Martha found her voice finally, rough from not speaking. Home, Rowan said simply, to the high country. But the farm is yours, legally bought, legally owned. We'll sort out the rest later. Right now you need to get away from those vultures. The horse moved beneath them, powerful muscles bunching and releasing as they left Red Hollow behind. Martha looked back once and saw the town shrinking in the distance, saw the people still standing in the square, saw her old life fading like a dream upon waking. She should have been terrified. She was riding off into the mountains with a strange man, leaving behind everything familiar, heading into the wilderness with no idea what came next. But the bearskin coat was warm around her shoulders, and the arm that steadied her in the saddle was solid and safe, and for the first time in 2 years, Martha Hale didn't feel like she was drowning. They rode for hours as the sun tracked across the sky. The valley floor gave way to foothills, then to steep mountain slopes thick with pine and aspen. The air grew thinner, colder, cleaner. No one spoke. The only sounds were the horse's steady breathing, the creak of leather, and the cry of hawks overhead. Finally, as the sun touched the western peaks and turned them gold, they came to a cabin. It sat in a high meadow beside a rushing creek, surrounded by forest on three sides and open to a view of the valley below. The cabin was solidly built from hewn logs, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting a fire already laid. A smaller structure nearby served as a barn and storage. Rowan dismounted and helped Martha down. Her legs trembled from the ride, from exhaustion, from the surreal nature of the entire day. She stood there in his bearskin coat, dwarfed by the mountains, and waited for him to explain. He didn't. Instead, he led the horse to the barn, unsaddled it with practiced efficiency, and when he returned, he simply said, "You're safe here. Get warm. There's stew on the fire and bread in the box. We'll talk in the morning." Then he disappeared into the barn, leaving Martha alone. She stood in the fading light for a long moment, then climbed the porch steps and pushed open the cabin door. Inside was simple but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, fire crackling cheerfully. A table and two chairs sat near the hearth. A bed frame in the corner was piled with furs and blankets. Shelves held supplies, flour, salt, coffee, dried meat. Everything was clean, organized, cared for. On the table sat a bowl of stew and a hunk of dark bread. Martha's stomach growled. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, yesterday maybe, or the day before. She sat down, pulled the bowl close, and took a bite. It was good, simple, but good, rich with venison and root vegetables and herbs she couldn't name. She ate slowly, letting the warmth spread through her body, and tried to understand what had happened. A stranger had saved her. Why? What did Rowan Pike want? Men didn't spend $2,000 on a woman they'd never met without expecting something in return. Was she supposed to be grateful, indebted? Was this rescue or just another kind of trap? The cabin door opened. Rowan stepped inside, bringing cold air and the smell of pine. He moved to the fireplace, added wood, poked at the flames. Still didn't speak. "Why?" Martha asked finally. He glanced at her. "Why what? Why did you do it? Why spend all that money on a stranger?" Rowan settled into the other chair, his large frame making it look like children's furniture. For a long time he just looked at the fire, and Martha thought he might not answer at all. Then he said, "Saw what was happening, didn't like it." "That's it? You just didn't like it?" "Crowell's been circling your land for a year. Everyone in the valley knows it, but nobody does anything because that's how men like him operate, slow and legal and careful, so when they take what they want, nobody can say it wasn't fair." Martha stared at him. "You knew about my troubles?" "Everyone knew. Small territory, word travels." He met her eyes finally. "I come down to trade sometimes. Hear things. Heard Crowell was arranging your debts, making sure you owed the right people who'd sell to him when the time came. Heard about the auction 2 weeks ago. And you decided to, what? Save me? Decided to stop him from stealing what's yours." Rowan's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "That land's been in your family how long? Thomas filed the claim in '79. We built everything from nothing. Then it's yours, not Crowell's, not anyone else's." He stood, moved to a chest in the corner, and pulled out blankets. "You can have the bed. I'll sleep in the barn." "Wait." Martha rose, the bearskin coat sliding from her shoulders. "I don't understand. You bought my land. That makes it yours now, doesn't it?" Rowan looked at her with something that might have been amusement. "I bought it to keep Crowell from getting it. Soon as we get down to the land office and sort out the paperwork, it goes back in your name. But get some sleep, Mrs. Hale. You've had a long day. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." He left before she could protest, the door closing softly behind him. Martha stood alone in the cabin, surrounded by warmth and safety and the lingering smell of pine smoke. Her mind spun with questions, with confusion, with a strange flutter of something she couldn't quite name. Outside, the mountains rose dark against the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. And in the barn, a man who'd spent $2,000 on a stranger's dignity settled into the hay to sleep. Martha moved to the window and looked out at the night. The valley spread below, distant lights marking Red Hollow. From up here, it seemed small, insignificant, like a bad dream she was finally waking from. She thought about Crowell's expression when Rowan outbid him, thought about the crowd's shocked silence, thought about walking off that platform with her head high for the first time in years. Maybe she didn't understand Rowan Pike's motives. Maybe this was charity or pity or something else entirely. But standing here in this cabin, warm and fed and safe, Martha realized something important. For the first time since Thomas died, she wasn't alone. And for tonight, that was enough. She banked the fire, climbed into the bed piled with soft furs, and pulled the blankets close. Through the window, stars blazed in the clear mountain air. The creek sang its endless song. And somewhere between one breath and the next, Martha Hale fell into the deepest sleep she'd known in 2 years. In the barn, Rowan Pike lay in the darkness and listened to the night. He'd told the truth. He'd heard about Crowell's schemes, about the auction, about a widow being stripped of everything. But he hadn't told her everything. Hadn't told her that he'd watched Thomas Hale file that claim in '79, had seen a good man with hope in his eyes and a wife who looked at him like he hung the stars. Hadn't told her that he'd been in town the day of Thomas's funeral, had seen her standing alone by the grave while the town whispered and judged. Hadn't told her that some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight cost everything you had. The mountains knew his secrets, the wind carried them away, and tomorrow, when the sun rose over the high country, they'd begin the work of putting a broken woman back together. Not because she needed saving, but because she deserved a chance to save herself. Morning came slow to the high country, creeping through the pines in fingers of pale gold that turned the frost to diamonds. Martha woke to silence so complete it felt like the world had been remade overnight. No chickens clucking for feed, no familiar creak of her farmhouse settling, no weight of dread pressing down on her chest before she even opened her eyes. Just peace. She lay still beneath the firs, letting her mind catch up to where her body had landed. The cabin. The mountains. Rowan Pike. Yesterday's auction felt like something from another lifetime, distant and unreal, except her muscles ached from hours in the saddle and her dress still smelled like the dust of Red Hollow's town square. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching dust motes in its beam. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin held that particular chill of high-altitude mornings. Martha pushed back the blankets and stood, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. Someone, Rowan, it must have been, had left a basin of water on the table and a clean towel beside it. She washed her face and hands, the water so cold it made her gasp, then tried to do something with her hair. The braid had come half undone in the night, and she didn't have her brush, didn't have anything except the clothes on her back and borrowed shelter. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt oddly liberating, like she'd been stripped down to the bones of herself and might finally see what was left. The cabin door opened without warning. Rowan ducked through carrying an armload of split wood. He nodded to her, said nothing, and proceeded to rebuild the fire with the efficient movements of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully again, driving back the morning cold. "Coffee's on," he said, gesturing to a pot sitting among the coals. "Cups in the cupboard." Martha found 2 tin cups and poured for both of them. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, black as sin, and probably capable of waking the dead. She took a sip and felt it burn all the way down. Rowan accepted his cup with a slight nod and settled into one of the chairs, his long legs stretched toward the fire. For a while they just sat there, drinking coffee as the sun climbed higher and the mountains came alive with birdsong. Finally, Martha couldn't stand the silence anymore. "What happens now?" "You tell me. I don't understand." Rowan looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You got choices to make, Mrs. Hale. I can take you back down to your farm today if that's what you want. Get the paperwork sorted, make sure everything's legal and proper, then leave you to it. Or you can stay up here a while, get your strength back, figure things out without the whole town watching and waiting for you to fail again." The words stung because they were true. If she went back now, she'd be walking into the same trap, alone on a farm she couldn't work, surrounded by people who'd watched her humiliation, with Victor Crowell still circling like a vulture. Nothing would have changed except she'd have a different kind of debt, one she didn't understand and couldn't repay. "Why are you doing this?" Martha asked again. "And don't tell me it's just because you didn't like what was happening. Men don't spend fortunes on strangers out of simple disapproval. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. Your husband was a good man. Only time I ever spoke to Thomas Hale was when he filed his claim. He came into the land office same day I was registering a trap line. We got to talking. He told me about his plans, how he was going to build something that lasted, something to pass down. He talked about you like you were the center of his whole world. Martha's throat tightened. She remembered that day. Thomas had come home so excited, waving the claim papers like they were made of gold. After he died, Rowan continued, I watched Crowell move in, watched him offer help that came with hooks, watched the town turn on you because that's what small-minded people do when someone's down. They kick harder. He met her eyes. Maybe I got tired of watching. Maybe I figured if Thomas Hale thought you were worth building a life around, you were worth helping when that life fell apart. You didn't even know me. Didn't need to. Knew enough. He stood, moving to the window. But here's what you need to understand, Mrs. Hale. I didn't buy you. Didn't buy the right to tell you what to do or how to live. Bought you time, that's all. Time to heal. Time to get strong. Time to decide what kind of life you want when you're not drowning. Martha absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. And what do you get out of it? Satisfaction of knowing Crowell didn't win. Rowan's smile was slight, barely there. Man's been trying to control the whole valley for years. Water rights, land rights, mineral rights. He wants it all. Your property sits right where Widow's Creek feeds into the Snake. Control that? Control the flow to half the ranches downstream. That's real power. I never knew it mattered so much. Thomas knew. Why you think he fought so hard for those rights? Why you think Crowell came after you so careful and legal? Rowan turned from the window. You were never just a widow in debt, Mrs. Hale. You were an obstacle, and Crowell doesn't tolerate obstacles. The weight of this settled on Martha's shoulders. She thought her troubles were personal, her failure, her weakness, her inability to manage without Thomas. But it had never been about her at all. She was just a piece on a board, a problem to be solved, a thing standing between a powerful man and what he wanted. The realization made something shift inside her chest. Anger, maybe, or the first stirrings of something like pride. How long can I stay? She asked. Long as you need. And you'll really transfer the land back to my name? Already drew up the papers. Soon as you're ready to go down to the land office, we'll make it official. Martha stood, moved to the window beside him. The view stole her breath, mountains rising in layers of blue and purple. The valley spread below like a promised land. Sky so big and clear it seemed to go on forever. From up here, Red Hollow was invisible. From up here, the whole world looked different. I'd like to stay, she said quietly, if the offer's real. It's real. Then I accept. And Mr. Pike? She looked up at him, this mountain of a man who'd upended her life with casual grace. Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay. Don't want repayment. Want you to stop thinking you owe the world something just for existing. His voice was gentle but firm. You've been beaten down so long you forgot how to stand up straight. Time to remember. Before Martha could respond, Rowan was moving toward the door. Get dressed for work. If you're staying, you pull your weight. This isn't a rest cure. Work? Winter's coming. Lots to do before the snow flies. He paused at the threshold. You know how to split wood? No. You will by tonight. Change into something practical. There's spare clothes in the chest. Nothing fancy, but better than a funeral dress. He left her standing there, half bewildered and half intrigued. Martha went to the chest and found men's work clothes. Flannel shirts, canvas pants, wool socks. Everything was too large, but she rolled the sleeves and cuffs and belted the pants with a length of rope. When she looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. No corset, no petticoats, no proper dress, just practical clothes on a practical body, ready for practical work. It should have felt shameful. Instead, it felt like freedom. Outside, Rowan had set up a chopping block and laid out several logs. He demonstrated the proper stance, the right grip on the axe, the way to let gravity and momentum do most of the work. Then he handed her the axe. It was heavier than she expected. Martha hefted it, positioned herself the way he'd shown, and swung. The blade bit into the log but didn't split it. She tried again, same result. "Don't muscle it," Rowan said from where he sat on a stump, whittling something. "You're trying to force it. Let the axe do what it's made to do." Martha adjusted her grip, took a breath, and swung again. This time the log split clean through, both halves tumbling to the ground. The satisfaction was immediate and visceral. "There you go." She split another log, then another. Her shoulders began to burn, her hands to ache, but she kept going. There was something meditative about it. The repetitive motion, the clean crack of wood giving way, the growing pile of split logs. Each swing was a small victory, proof that her body could still do useful things, that she wasn't as weak or useless as Red Hollow had made her believe. By midday, she'd split a respectable pile, and her arms felt like they might fall off. Rowan appeared with water and dried venison, and they sat on the porch eating in companionable silence. "You did good," he said eventually. "I split some wood. That's hardly impressive." "You did something you've never done before without complaining or quitting. That's more impressive than you think." They spent the afternoon stacking the split wood in neat rows under the cabin's eaves. Rowan explained how the wood needed to season, how you could tell dry wood from wet by the sound it made when you knocked two pieces together, how to arrange the stack for proper airflow. Martha absorbed it all, filing away knowledge she'd never thought she'd need. As the sun dropped toward the western peaks, Rowan disappeared into the forest with his rifle and returned an hour later with 2 rabbits. He showed Martha how to skin and clean them, how to save the pelts for tanning, how to prepare the meat for cooking. It was bloody, visceral work that would have made her stomach turn a week ago. Now she just focused on learning, on doing it right. They cooked the rabbits over the fire with wild onions and herbs Rowan gathered from the meadow. The smell filled the cabin, rich and savory. When they sat down to eat, Martha realized she was ravenous in a way she hadn't been in years. Not the hollow hunger of grief and depression, but the honest appetite of someone who'd worked hard and earned their meal. "Tell me about Thomas," Rowan said as they ate. Martha looked up, surprised. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell." So she told him. About meeting Thomas at a church social in St. Louis, both of them young and full of dreams, about his proposal on a riverbank, his promise that they'd build something beautiful together. About the journey west, the hard years of establishing the farm, the small joys of making a home from nothing. About his laugh, his strength, his gentle hands, his absolute certainty that their life would work out. "He never doubted," Martha said softly. "Even when crops failed or money got tight, he believed we'd make it through. I think that's what I miss most, his certainty. Without him, I lost my own." "Easy to lose yourself when you're grieving," Rowan observed. "Harder to find your way back." "Did you ever—" Martha hesitated. "Were you ever married?" "Once. Long time ago." Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shuddered in his eyes. "She died in childbirth, the baby too." "I'm sorry." "It was 15 years ago. Pain fades, but you don't forget." He stood, collected their plates. "That's when I came to the mountains. Couldn't stand being around people anymore. Couldn't stand their pity and their questions. Up here, nobody asks anything. The quiet suits me." Martha watched him move around the cabin, this man who'd built a life out of solitude and seemed content with it. "Don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes. But lonely's better than being surrounded by people and still feeling alone." He glanced at her. "You know what I mean." She did. The years after Thomas's death had been full of people. Neighbors bringing casseroles, church ladies offering prayers, merchants extending credit. But every interaction had made her feel more isolated, more different, more wrong. Their kindness had edges. Their help came with expectations, and none of them really saw her. They saw a widow, a burden, a problem to be managed or gossiped about. "Why are you letting me stay?" Martha asked. "If you came up here to get away from people, why bring me into your quiet?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Maybe because your quiet and my quiet are the same kind. Maybe because I remember what it's like to need somewhere safe to fall apart and put yourself back together. Or maybe," He met her eyes. I just got tired of being alone with my own thoughts. The honesty of it caught Martha off guard. This wasn't rescue or charity or pity. This was two broken people finding shelter in each other's company. No strings attached, no debts incurred. Just the simple human need for connection without performance or pretense. Well, she said slowly, if I'm going to be here, I should know more than wood splitting. What else needs doing before winter? Rowan's smile was slight but genuine. Everything. We'll start with the garden tomorrow. Need to harvest what's left and prepare the beds. Then there's meat to smoke, herbs to dry, root cellar to stock. I've got trap lines to check, fences to mend, firewood to finish cutting. Winter comes hard up here. We don't prepare. We don't survive. Then teach me, Martha said. I want to learn. And so began a routine that felt both strange and right. They rose with the sun and worked until dark, moving through tasks with the efficiency of longtime partners. Rowan taught and Martha learned how to identify edible plants, how to preserve food, how to read weather in the clouds and predict snow by the way animals behaved. She learned to shoot his rifle, her first attempts wild and laughable but improving with practice. She learned to move in the mountains, to watch her footing, to respect the wilderness that could kill the careless or unprepared. Her body changed. The soft flesh that had made her an object of mockery in Red Hollow began to reshape itself into muscle and strength. She could split wood for an hour without stopping, could haul water from the creek, could dress game and tan hides without flinching. The weight didn't disappear. She was still a large woman, would always be. But now that size came with capability. She wasn't fat and useless. She was strong. Rowan never commented on her appearance, never made her feel like her body was something to apologize for or hide. He simply treated her like a partner, expecting competence and praising achievement. When she struggled with a task, he showed her different approaches until she found what worked. When she succeeded, he nodded approval and moved on to the next challenge. The simplicity of it was healing in ways Martha couldn't articulate. 3 weeks into her stay, they were working in the root cellar when Martha finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. When do we go to the land office to transfer the property? Rowan paused in his sorting of potatoes. Whenever you're ready. I'm ready now. I should face this, shouldn't I? Face Crowell and the town and all of it? Should and want aren't the same thing. No, Martha agreed, but I can't hide forever, and I need to know. I need to see the papers myself, need to understand what I'm walking back into. Rowan studied her in the dim light of the cellar. All right, we'll go down tomorrow. But Martha? He used her first name for the first time, and it sounded strange and intimate in his rough voice. Whatever happens down there, you're not alone in it. I'll stand with you as long as you need me. The next morning, they rode down from the high country on Rowan's massive bay. Martha wore her own dress again, cleaned and mended, but underneath she kept on the canvas pants and boots. Armor, she thought, practical and strong, hidden where only she knew it existed. Red Hollow looked exactly the same. Dusty streets, weathered buildings, people moving through their lives with the same petty concerns and small cruelties. But Martha felt different. She sat straighter in the saddle, met stairs without flinching, and when they dismounted in front of the land office, she walked in with her head high. Pettigrew looked up from his desk and went pale. Mrs. Hale, Mr. Pike, we weren't expecting you. Need to file the transfer papers, Rowan said, pulling documents from his coat. Purchase property to be returned to original owner's name. The clerk fumbled with the papers, reading them over and over as if hoping the words would change. This is highly unusual. You bought the property at legal auction. It's yours. And now I'm selling it back to Mrs. Hale for $1, which makes it hers again. That a problem? No, let me get the forms. Pettigrew disappeared into a back room, leaving them alone. Martha looked around the office, remembering the last time she'd been here with Thomas. Everything had seemed possible then. Now everything felt precarious, like she was building on sand instead of stone. The door opened behind them. Martha knew, without looking, who it would be. Victor Crowell stepped into the office, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light. He smiled when he saw them, but his eyes were ice. Mrs. Hale, How delightful to see you looking so robust. The mountain air must agree with you. His gaze shifted to Rowan. Pike, I heard you'd come down from your cave. Councilman. Rowan's voice was flat, unimpressed. I hope you're not here to make trouble over the auction, Crowell continued smoothly. Everything was perfectly legal. I have receipts and witnesses. We're here to file papers, Martha interrupted. Her voice was steady, surprising her. Mr. Pike is transferring my property back into my name. Crowell's expression flickered. How generous. Though I wonder, Mrs. Hale, if you've considered the wisdom of taking on such responsibility again. After all, it was too much for you before. What's changed? I have. The words came without thought, but Martha knew they were true. And I'm not alone anymore. Ah, yes, your mountain man protector. How very romantic. Crowell's smile had teeth now. But winter's coming, Mrs. Hale. Spring always comes after winter, though, doesn't it? And Mr. Pike will go back to his solitude, and you'll be right where you started. Alone. In debt. Desperate. Careful, Crowell. Rowan's voice was quiet, but the threat in it was unmistakable. Oh, I'm always careful. I work within the law, unlike some. Crowell straightened his coat. Mrs. Hale, when you're ready to sell, and you will be ready, sooner rather than later, I'll make you a fair offer. Better than fair? You can walk away with cash in hand and no more worries. Think about it. He left before either of them could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded like a promise. Pettigrew returned with the forms, clearly having heard every word. His hand shook as he laid out the paperwork. Just need signatures here, here, and here. Mrs. Hale, you'll need to acknowledge receipt of the property and confirm the sale price. Martha signed where he indicated, her signature bold and clear. Rowan signed beside her. The clerk stamped and filed and shuffled papers with the nervous energy of a man who knew he was witnessing something that would have consequences. It's done, Pettigrew said finally. Property is legally restored to Martha Hale, widow of Thomas Hale, with all associated rights and privileges. Martha took the deed with both hands. Her name, her land, her water rights. It was real. It was hers again. Outside, the afternoon sun painted Red Hollow in shades of amber and gold. People on the street stopped to stare as Martha and Rowan emerged from the land office. She saw Agnes Coldwell whispering to Prudence Marsh, saw the Kincaid brothers watching from across the street, their expressions calculating and mean, and she realized with sudden crystalline clarity that owning the land meant nothing if she couldn't defend it. The paper in her hands was just paper. Crowell would come for her again, slower this time, more careful. He'd wait for Rowan to leave, wait for her to stumble, wait for any opening to take what he wanted. Unless she found a way to be stronger than paper, stronger than law, strong enough that men like Crowell would break themselves against her rather than the other way around. I'm not going back up the mountain, Martha said as they reached the horse. Rowan looked at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that if I hide, he wins. If I stay up there in safety while my farm sits empty, he'll find a way to take it. Legal or not, he'll find a way. She met his eyes. I need to go back. To the farm. To my home. Not alone. I wouldn't ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. Rowan's jaw was set. We go back together. Get the place running again. Show the valley you're not going anywhere. That could take months. Maybe the whole winter. Then it takes the whole winter. He swung into the saddle, offered his hand to pull her up. You said you wanted to learn how to be strong. Can't do that hiding in the mountains. Time to stand and fight. They rode out of Red Hollow as the sun set, heading not back to the high country, but east toward her farm. Martha's farm. Her land, her fight, her chance to prove that she was more than the broken widow they'd tried to sell off piece by piece. The farmhouse appeared as darkness fell, dark and empty and waiting. It looked smaller than Martha remembered, more worn, but it was still standing, still hers. They dismounted in the yard. Rowan began unloading supplies from the saddlebags while Martha stood looking at her home. So many memories lived in those walls, joy and sorrow, love and loss, everything that made a life. You sure about this? Rowan asked quietly. Martha looked at him, this man who'd given her back more than just her land. He'd given her time, space, strength, the belief that she could be something other than what grief and cruelty had made her. "I'm sure," she said. "Whatever comes, I'm ready." They walked to the door together, and Martha pushed it open on creaking hinges. Inside was darkness and dust and the ghost of everything she'd lost. But tomorrow the sun would rise. Tomorrow they'd start the work of rebuilding, not just the farm, but the woman who lived there. And when Crowell came again, and he would come, he'd find not a desperate widow, but a force to be reckoned with. Martha Hale was done being someone's victim. It was time to show Red Hollow what she'd become. The first night back in the farmhouse, Martha couldn't sleep. She lay in her old bed, the one Rowan had insisted she take while he made camp in the barn, and listened to the familiar sounds of settling wood and wind through the eaves. Everything was the same, and nothing was the same. The quilt still smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets she'd made years ago. The water stain on the ceiling still looked like a rabbit if you squinted. But the woman lying here wasn't the same person who'd left 3 weeks ago to face an auction block. She rose before dawn and found Rowan already up, coffee brewing over a fire he'd built in the yard. The farmhouse stove needed cleaning, he explained, and the chimney probably had a bird's nest or two blocking it. They'd get to it today along with everything else. Everything else turned out to be a list so long it made Martha's head spin. The barn roof had gaps that would let in snow. The fences were down in a dozen places. The well needed the winch repaired. The chicken coop stood empty, its wire torn and useless. 2 years of neglect had turned her farm into a monument to entropy, everything slowly sliding toward ruin. "Where do we even start?" Martha asked, staring at the overwhelm of it all. "Same place you start anything, one task at a time." Rowan handed her a cup of coffee. "Today we fix the stove and chimney, get the house livable. Tomorrow we assess the barn. Day after we start on fences. Work from the center out, home first, then the structures, then the land." They worked through the morning in comfortable silence, Rowan up on the roof clearing debris, while Martha scrubbed 2 years of dust and mouse droppings from the stove. It was hard, dirty work that left her sweating despite the October chill. But there was satisfaction in it too, in reclaiming spaces that had been abandoned, in making her home functional again. Around noon, a wagon rattled up the drive. Martha's stomach clenched, but Rowan just nodded from his perch on the roof and kept working. The wagon stopped in the yard, and a woman climbed down, middle-aged, sturdy, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Mrs. Hale?" The woman's voice was tentative. "I'm Clara Jennings. My husband and I have the spread about 5 miles west." Martha wiped her hands on her apron, trying to place the name. "I remember. You came to Thomas's funeral." "I did." Clara glanced up at Rowan, then back to Martha. "I heard you were back. Heard what happened at the auction, too. Whole Valley's talking about it." "I'm sure they are." Martha kept her voice neutral, waiting for whatever came next. Pity, probably, or veiled criticism dressed up as concern. But Clara surprised her. "I brought you some things. Chickens, mostly. I've got too many and figured you could use a starter flock. And some preserves, salt pork, flour, just basics to get you through till you're on your feet." "I can't accept—" "Yes, you can." Clara's tone was firm. "Look, Mrs. Hale, I'm not good with pretty words, so I'll speak plain. What Crowell did to you was wrong. What this town did, standing by and watching him do it, was wrong. Some of us knew it but didn't speak up, and that makes us complicit. This isn't charity, it's apology." Martha stared at her, throat tight. "Why now? Why not before?" "Because before you were alone and it felt dangerous to go against Crowell. He's got influence, controls credit, and contracts. Most folks here depend on him in one way or another." Clara met her eyes steadily. "But you're not alone anymore. Pike's backing you, and that changes things. Makes it safer for the rest of us to do what we should have done all along." From the roof came Rowan's voice, dry and amused. "I'm just here fixing a chimney, Mrs. Jennings, and I'm just delivering chickens, Mr. Pike." Clara's smile was quick and knowing. "But we both know what we're really doing." She helped Martha unload the wagon, a crate of 6 hens and a rooster, all healthy and already laying. bags of flour and cornmeal, jars of preserved vegetables, a wheel of cheese wrapped in cloth, and at the bottom, carefully packed, a set of seed packets for spring planting. "The seeds are from my own garden," Clara said. "Beans, squash, carrots, turnips, all tested for this climate, all good producers. You plant these come April, you'll have food by summer." "Mrs. Jennings, Clara, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, just succeed. Show Crowell and everyone else that we don't have to accept the way things are." Clara climbed back onto her wagon. "And Mrs. Hale? You need help, you send word. My husband's got 3 strong sons, and I've got a spine when I choose to use it. We're not far." She drove off, leaving Martha standing in the yard with a lump in her throat and a crate of chickens at her feet. Rowan climbed down from the roof and surveyed the supplies. "See?" he said quietly. "You're not as alone as you think." They spent the afternoon repairing the chicken coop and getting the birds settled. The rooster strutted around like he owned the place, and the hens immediately began investigating every corner for bugs and seeds. Martha found herself smiling, something she hadn't done much of lately. There was life here again, movement and purpose beyond her own struggling survival. Over the next week, more visitors came. Not many, but enough to matter. A rancher named Dutch McCall brought lumber for the barn roof, claiming he'd over-ordered and had no use for it. The blacksmith's wife dropped off old tools her husband had repaired. A hammer, a saw, various implements Martha had sold off during the desperate months. Each visitor had an excuse, a reason that had nothing to do with defying Victor Crowell or choosing sides in a fight that was clearly brewing. But Martha understood what was really happening. Clara had been right. Rowan's presence changed the equation. He made it safer for decent people to act on their better instincts, gave them cover to do what conscience demanded. And with each visitor, with each small gift or offer of help, Martha felt the noose of isolation loosening its grip. Crowell must have felt it too, because he showed up on a cold morning 2 weeks after they'd returned to the farm. Martha was in the barn helping Rowan mend harness when she heard horses in the yard. She walked out to find Crowell dismounting from a fine black gelding, accompanied by 2 men she didn't recognize. They had the look of hired muscle, thick through the shoulders, eyes flat and assessing, hands never far from the guns at their hips. "Mrs. Hale." Crowell's smile was all charm and no warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was in the area and thought I'd check on your progress. See how you're managing." "We're managing fine." Martha kept her voice level, aware of Rowan moving up behind her, a solid presence at her back. "So I see. The place is looking better already. Pike's handiwork, I assume?" Crowell's gaze shifted past her. "You're a man of many talents, it seems. Trapper, carpenter, nursemaid." "Careful," Rowan said softly. "Oh, I mean no offense. I'm simply impressed by your dedication, though I do wonder how long it will last. Winter's nearly here, and I imagine the high country calls to you, the solitude you're so fond of." "I'm where I need to be," Rowan replied. Crowell's expression hardened slightly, the mask slipping. "Of course. Well, Mrs. Hale, I'll be direct. I've heard you've been accepting gifts from various members of the community. Chickens, lumber, supplies. How generous of them." "People have been kind," Martha said carefully. "Indeed. Though I wonder if you've considered what you're really accepting. You see, many of these generous souls owe me money. The Jennings, for instance. I hold the note on their property. Dutch McCall uses my credit at the general store. The blacksmith's lease comes through my investment group." Crowell's smile returned, colder now. "I'd hate to think they were being put in a difficult position, forced to choose between helping a neighbor and honoring their obligations to me." The threat was clear and cruel. Help Martha, and Crowell would collect his debts. Make them choose between decency and survival, and most would choose survival. It was elegant in its viciousness. "You can't punish people for basic kindness," Martha said, anger rising in her chest. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply managing my business interests. If certain individuals choose to strain their finances by giving away resources they can barely afford, well, I can't be expected to extend indefinite credit, can I? That would be irresponsible of me." Martha felt the trap closing. Accept help and watch her neighbors suffer for it. Refuse help and fail alone, proving Crowell right about her inability to manage. Either way, he won. But Rowan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the cold air. "How much?" Crowell blinked. Excuse me? How much do the Jennings owe you? McCall? The blacksmith and anyone else who's helped Martha? Name the figure. I'll buy their notes. That's not how it works. That's exactly how it works. You hold debt, you can sell debt. I'll pay fair value, plus 20% for immediate transfer. You get your money, they get clear of you, and you lose your leverage. Rowan's gray eyes were steady as stone. Unless this was never about money, unless it was always about control. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. One of Crowell's hired men shifted his weight, hand drifting toward his gun. Rowan noticed but didn't react, didn't even look away from Crowell's face. Finally, Crowell laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You're quite the white knight, Pike, but even you don't have unlimited resources. How long can you keep buying your way out of reality? A month? 2? Eventually you'll run dry, and when you do, everything falls apart. Maybe, Rowan agreed. Or maybe you'll realize that some fights cost more than they're worth. This? Crowell gestured at the farm, at Martha, at the barn and house and land. This cost me nothing but patience, and I have patience in abundance, I assure you. He turned to Martha. Think about my offer, Mrs. Hale. Sell now, while you can still walk away with something. Because if you wait until you fail, and you will fail, you'll get nothing but a hard lesson in how the world actually works. He mounted his horse, his men following suit. They rode out without another word, hoofbeats fading into the distance like a retreating storm. Martha stood trembling, not from fear but from rage. He's going to hurt everyone who helps me. He'll ruin them just to prove a point. Maybe, Rowan said, or maybe we give them a reason to stand firm. How? You can't buy everyone's freedom from him. He was right. Even you don't have that much money. Rowan looked at her, something calculating in his expression. Come inside. There's something I need to show you. In the farmhouse, he spread a map across the table, the territorial survey map showing property lines, watercourses, and land claims throughout the valley. He pointed to Martha's property, highlighted in pencil. Your land sits here, where Widow's Creek flows into the Snake. See these other properties? His finger traced lines downstream. Jennings, McCall, the Simmons Ranch, Peterson's Dairy. All of them depend on water flow from the Snake, which means they depend on consistent flow from Widow's Creek. I know the water rights matter, you've said. What I haven't said is how much they matter, or rather, what's actually at stake. Rowan pulled out another document, this one official and dense with legal language. I did some research while we were in the high country. Had a lawyer friend in Laramie look into territorial water law and how it applies to your situation. Martha scanned the document, struggling to make sense of the legal terminology. I don't understand. It's simple, really. Water rights in Wyoming Territory aren't just about permission to use water. They're about obligation to maintain consistent flow to downstream users. If you have recognized rights to Widow's Creek, which you do, granted in perpetuity when Thomas filed his claim, you also have legal authority to regulate that flow. You can't cut it off entirely without cause, but you can control it, manage it, determine usage. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning if Crowell pressures your neighbors, if he calls their debts or raises their costs, or makes their lives difficult, you have the legal right to reduce water flow to his properties. And Crowell owns significant holdings downstream. His saloon, his rental properties, his investment in the mill, all of it depends on water from the Snake, which depends on steady flow from Widow's Creek. Martha stared at the map, seeing it with new eyes. She'd thought of her land as something small and insignificant, 100 acres and a struggling farm. But Thomas had been smarter than she'd realized. He'd claimed the keystone, the piece that held the whole valley together. So Crowell needs my cooperation, she said slowly. More than that. He needs you not to exist as an independent actor. As long as you own this land and those rights, you have power over him. Real, legal, enforceable power. That's why he came after you so carefully. That's why he's still trying to force you out. Rowan tapped the map. This isn't about a widow's farm. It's about who controls the valley's future. But I still don't know how this helps our neighbors. How does my water rights protect them from Crowell's debts? Because we make a deal. We tell everyone who's helped you, and everyone who wants to help you that you're forming a water cooperative. Anyone who joins gets guaranteed water access at fair rates, protected by written contract. In exchange, they support the cooperative's interests, which means supporting you. Martha's mind raced. Crowell can't pressure them if they have guaranteed water access. He could call their debts, but they'd still have what they need to operate. And if he tries to retaliate through the water supply, I can regulate flow to his properties. Exactly. You create a mutual protection agreement. They help you, you help them, and Crowell can't isolate any single person without attacking the whole group. Rowan leaned back. It won't stop him entirely. He'll find other ways to apply pressure, but it takes away his easiest weapons and makes the fight costly for him instead of easy. And expensive for him, Martha added, understanding dawning. If he wants to break the cooperative, he has to go after everyone at once, which means multiple legal battles, public confrontations, political capital spent. Even Crowell doesn't have infinite resources. Now you're thinking like Thomas did. Why do you think he fought so hard for those rights? He knew what they meant. He was building something bigger than a farm. He was building leverage for the whole community of smallholders against men like Crowell who want to consolidate everything. Martha sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the implications. All this time, she'd thought Thomas had just been stubborn about paperwork, insistent on formalities that didn't really matter. But he'd been playing a longer game, thinking decades ahead to a future where water would be the currency that mattered most. And he'd trusted her to be part of that future. Had built his plans around the belief that she'd be there beside him, strong enough and smart enough to understand what they'd created. She'd failed him by not seeing it, but she wouldn't fail him again. "How do we start?" she asked. "We talk to the Jennings first. Clara's smart and she has influence. If she understands what we're proposing, she can help spread the word. Then we approach the others, McCall, the blacksmith, anyone else who's helped or who has reason to want independence from Crowell's control. He'll fight this. When he realizes what we're doing, he'll fight it hard," Rowan agreed. "But fighting has costs, and we'll make sure he pays every one of them. The question is whether you're ready for that fight, because once we start this, there's no going back. You'll be declaring war on the most powerful man in the valley." Martha thought about the auction block, about Crowell's smile as he'd tried to buy her dignity for pocket change, thought about her neighbors suffering in silence because standing up seemed too dangerous, thought about Thomas's dreams and the future he'd tried to build. "I'm ready," she said. "Tell me what to do." They rode to the Jennings place that afternoon, the map and legal documents safely stored in Rowan's saddlebag. Clara met them at the door, wiping flour from her hands, and her expression shifted from surprise to concern when she saw their faces. "Something's happened," she said. It wasn't a question. "Something's about to happen," Martha replied. "Can we talk? All of us? You, your husband, anyone else you trust?" An hour later, they sat around the Jennings kitchen table. Clara and her husband Robert, their 3 grown sons, and a neighbor named Sarah Peterson who ran the dairy and apparently had a spine of steel beneath her quiet demeanor. Martha spread out the map and explained what Rowan had discovered, what the water rights really meant, what they could build if they worked together. "A cooperative," Robert said slowly. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with calloused hands and shrewd eyes, guaranteed water access in exchange for mutual support. "And protection from Crowell's economic pressure," Claire added. "He calls our debt, we still have water. He raises costs at his stores, we help each other instead of depending on him." "It's dangerous," Sarah pointed out. Her voice was soft, but her gaze was sharp. "Crowell won't take this lying down. He'll see it as a direct challenge." "It is a direct challenge," Martha said, "but doing nothing is dangerous too. He's consolidating power, squeezing out anyone who won't bend to his will. How long before he owns everything and we're all working for him on his terms?" "She's right," one of the Jennings boys said. He was maybe 20, with his mother's forthright manner. "Crowell already controls half the valley. Give him another 5 years and he'll control it all." "So we fight now while we still can," Clara said firmly. "I'm in." "Robert?" Her husband studied the map for a long moment, then nodded. "I'm in, but we need more than just us. Need a real coalition, enough people that Crowell can't pick us off one by one." "McCall will join," Rowan said. "He's been looking for an excuse to tell Crowell where to shove his credit terms. The blacksmith, too. He hates being beholden. And once we have a core group, others will follow. People are tired of being afraid. They talked through the evening, working out details and contingencies. Who to approach, how to structure the agreements, what to do when Crowell inevitably retaliated. By the time Martha and Rowan rode back to her farm under a sky full of stars, they had the framework of something real. "This could actually work," Martha said softly. "It will work," Rowan corrected, "because it has to." Over the next 2 weeks, they moved through the valley like missionaries spreading a gospel of independence. They talked to ranchers and farmers, shopkeepers and tradesmen, anyone who had reason to resist Crowell's increasing control. Not everyone agreed to join. Some were too afraid, too indebted, too convinced that fighting was futile. But enough said yes. Enough saw the opportunity for what it was and chose courage over comfort. Dutch McCall signed on immediately, his weathered face splitting into a grin. "About time someone stood up to that bastard. Count me in for whatever you need." The blacksmith, a taciturn man named Gus Hoffman, shook Martha's hand with his soot-stained fingers and said, "Your Thomas was a good man, would have liked this plan. I'm honored to be part of it." Sarah Peterson brought 3 other dairy farmers with her, all of them women whose husbands had died or left, and who'd been managing alone while Crowell circled like a predator. "We're tired of being vulnerable," Sarah said simply. "Strength in numbers sounds good to us." By the end of the second week, they had 23 members in the cooperative, not a majority of the valley's landholders, but enough to matter, enough that Crowell couldn't ignore them. The reckoning came on a frigid morning in early November. Martha was feeding the chickens when she saw the riders coming, a dozen men, Crowell at their head, moving with the deliberate purpose of an invading army. She didn't run or hide. She walked to the farmhouse, called for Rowan, and stood on her porch waiting. Crowell dismounted in her yard, his hired men fanning out behind him. But before he could speak, more riders appeared, Clara and Robert Jennings, Dutch McCall and his sons, Gus Hoffman on his massive draft horse, Sarah Peterson and her fellow dairy farmers. They came from all directions, converging on Martha's farm like a gathering storm, until the yard was full of horses and people and the solid presence of united purpose. Crowell looked around at the assembled group, and for the first time, Martha saw something like uncertainty cross his face. "What's this?" he asked, voice sharp. "This," Martha said clearly, "is the Widows Creek Water Cooperative, and we have some things to discuss with you, Mr. Crowell, starting with how business is going to work in this valley from now on." The wind picked up, cold and clean, carrying the smell of coming snow. Martha stood with her people around her, with Rowan solid at her side, and met Victor Crowell's eyes without flinching. Let him see what he'd created. Let him understand that his cruelty had forged something stronger than his control. The fight was just beginning, but for the first time, Martha knew they could win. Crowell's face had gone the color of old paper, pale and brittle-looking in the November cold. He scanned the assembled group with eyes that calculated odds and found them suddenly less favorable than expected. Martha watched him recalibrate, watched the politician's mask slide back into place over whatever genuine emotion had flickered there. "How cozy," he said finally, recovering his smooth tone. "The valley's struggling farmers, united in their poverty. Very touching." "We're united in our water rights," Martha corrected, "and in our refusal to be bullied anymore." "Bullied? Mrs. Hale, I've never bullied anyone. I'm a businessman conducting legitimate business." "You manipulated my debts to steal my land," Martha said, her voice carrying across the yard. "You've used credit and contracts to control people who had no other options. You've built an empire on the backs of folks too scared or too desperate to say no." "Prove it." Crowell's smile was razor thin. "I have ledgers and contracts and witnesses that say every transaction I've ever made was legal and fair. You have conspiracy theories and hurt feelings." Dutch McCall urged his horse forward, his weathered face set hard. "You sold me equipment at twice the going rate, Crowell, said it was because of shipping costs. Then I found out you'd sold the same items to your friends for half what you charged me. Market prices fluctuate. You offered me a loan at 8% interest," Claire Jennings interrupted. "When I accepted, the papers said 12. You told me I'd misheard, that I was confused, made me feel stupid for questioning it." I've been operating in this valley for 20 years, Sarah Peterson added quietly. My husband bought our first herd from you, Mr. Crowell, paid top dollar for cattle that turned out to be half sick. When he complained, you suggested maybe he wasn't competent enough to manage livestock. He died believing he was a failure, never knowing he'd been cheated from the start. One by one, they spoke. 23 voices recounting 2 decades of small cruelties, calculated deceptions, and the kind of exploitation that stayed just inside the boundaries of law while violating every principle of decency. Crowell stood there taking it, his expression never changing, and Martha realized with cold clarity that he didn't care. He'd known what he was doing, had done it deliberately, systematically, and would do it again without hesitation. Men like him didn't reform, they only responded to power. When the last voice fell silent, Martha stepped forward. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Crowell. The Widows Creek Water Cooperative is now a legal entity, registered with the territorial government. Every person here has signed a binding agreement guaranteeing their water access in exchange for cooperative support. You can't cut any of us off without cutting off all of us. And if I choose to do exactly that, if I use my influence with the land office to challenge your precious water rights, then we reduce flow to your properties. Martha's voice was steady. Every business you own downstream loses water access. Your saloon, your rental houses, the mill you invested in, all of it runs dry until you back off. You wouldn't dare. That's economic warfare. No, Rowan said, speaking for the first time. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. That's the free market you're so fond of. Supply and demand. You demand our submission, we control the supply of what you need. Seems fair. Crowell's mask cracked, fury bleeding through. You're making a mistake, Pike. All of you are. I have friends in Cheyenne, connections you can't imagine. I can bring legal pressure that will bury you in paperwork and fees. I can make sure banks won't lend to you, suppliers won't sell to you, buyers won't purchase your goods. I can isolate you so completely you'll be begging to sell within 6 months. Maybe, Martha agreed. Or maybe your friends in Cheyenne will wonder why you're spending so much political capital on a fight with a widow's water cooperative. Maybe they'll start asking questions about your business practices, about where all your wealth really came from. Maybe the territorial auditor will take an interest in your tax declarations. She pulled a document from her coat, the ledger Rowan had found weeks ago, tucked away in the land office archives. The one that showed discrepancies between Crowell's reported income and his actual land acquisitions, numbers that didn't quite add up. Transactions that suggested he'd been playing fast and loose with territorial tax law for years. This is a copy, Martha said, holding it up. The original is with a lawyer in Laramie, along with instructions to file it with the territorial government if anything happens to me or anyone in this cooperative. You want to start a war, Mr. Crowell? We'll fight it on every front, and we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Crowell stared at the ledger, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Shock, rage, calculation, and finally, grudging respect. You've been busy, he said softly. I underestimated you, Mrs. Hale. Underestimated all of you. You underestimated our capacity to fight back, Clara said. That's what men like you always do. You assume weakness means surrender. Crowell's laugh was bitter. So this is checkmate, then? I back off or you destroy me. This is equilibrium, Martha corrected. You leave us alone, we leave you alone. You conduct your business legally and fairly, we don't interfere with your operations. But if you come after any member of this cooperative, if you manipulate debts or raise prices unfairly or use your influence to hurt people, we respond in kind. Mutual assured destruction. How very civilized. More civilized than what you've been doing, Dutch McCall growled. For a long moment, Crowell said nothing. His hired men shifted uneasily behind him, clearly uncomfortable with how this confrontation had evolved. Finally, Crowell straightened his shoulders and adjusted his coat with deliberate precision. You want peace? Fine. I'll leave your little cooperative alone. But understand this. I'm not surrendering. I'm choosing my battles. And if any of you step outside your precious agreements, if you give me even the slightest legal opening, I will crush you so thoroughly your grandchildren will still be paying off the debts. Understood, Martha said. Now get off my land. Crowell mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. His men followed, and the whole group wheeled their horses and rode out, hoofbeats fading into the cold morning. Martha stood watching until they disappeared, her heart hammering against her ribs, adrenaline making her hands shake. The moment they were gone, Clara let out a whoop that startled the chickens. "We did it! We actually backed him down!" "He'll honor it too," Robert said, grinning. "Man like Crowell respects power. Now that he knows we have it, he'll think twice before coming after us." The yard erupted in celebration, handshakes and backslapping, nervous laughter releasing tension, the giddy relief of people who'd faced down their fear and survived. Martha accepted congratulations in a daze, still processing what had just happened. They'd won. Actually won. Forced Victor Crowell to retreat, established real protection for everyone who'd been brave enough to stand with her. Rowan caught her eye from across the crowd and nodded, just once. No smile, no grand gesture, just acknowledgement of what they'd accomplished together. "This calls for a proper celebration," Dutch announced. "My place tonight. Bring food, bring instruments if you've got 'em. We've earned a party." The group dispersed slowly, people riding off in clusters, still talking excitedly about the confrontation. Clara was the last to leave, and she pulled Martha into a fierce hug before mounting her wagon. "You were magnificent," Clara said. "Thomas would have been so proud." After she'd gone, Martha and Rowan stood alone in the yard. The sun had burned through the morning clouds, and the day had turned bright and cold and perfect. Martha's farm looked different somehow. Not just hers anymore, but part of something larger. Connected. Protected. Strong. "You knew about that ledger for weeks," Martha said. "Why didn't you use it sooner?" "Because it needed to come from you, not me. Crowell had to see you as the threat, not just some mountain man fighting your battles." Rowan headed toward the barn. "Besides, leverage is most valuable when you save it for the right moment." "And this was the right moment? You tell me. Did it work?" Martha thought about Crowell's face, about the way his certainty had crumbled when confronted with united opposition, about 23 people who'd found their courage because she'd found hers first. "Yeah," she said softly. "It worked." They spent the rest of the day preparing for the evening celebration. Martha baked bread and a dried apple pie using Clara's preserves. Rowan disappeared into the forest and returned with a young buck, which he dressed and quartered with practiced efficiency. By the time they loaded the wagon and headed to Dutch McCall's ranch, the sun was setting in shades of orange and gold that turned the whole valley into something magical. The McCall place was already crowded when they arrived. Wagons and horses everywhere, children running wild in the yard, adults gathering around a massive bonfire that threw sparks into the darkening sky. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and music filled the air alongside the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. Martha had forgotten what this felt like. Community. Belonging. The simple joy of being among people who saw you as an equal, who valued your presence instead of judging your failings. She moved through the crowd, accepting greetings and congratulations, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like an outsider at her own life. "Mrs. Hale!" Sarah Peterson appeared with a cup of spiced cider. "Come sit with us. The women want to discuss spring planting strategies for the cooperative." Martha joined a circle of women gathered near the fire. Clara, Sarah, and several others she was just beginning to know. They talked about crop rotation and seed sharing, about helping each other during harvest, about building a network of support that went beyond just water rights. These women had survived hard lives and harder losses. They understood struggle in ways that men sometimes couldn't, understood what it meant to keep going when everything said quit. "We should formalize this," Clara said. "Not just the water cooperative, but a women's agricultural society. Share knowledge, pool resources, support each other's ventures." "Crowell won't like it," one of the dairy farmers pointed out. "The more independent we become, the less control he has." "Then he can go right on not liking it," Sarah said firmly. "We've spent too long shaping our lives around men's approval. Time to build what we need instead of asking permission." The conversation flowed from practical matters to personal ones: children and health, hopes and fears, the thousand small struggles of frontier life. Martha found herself talking about Thomas, about the good years before his death, about how grief had nearly destroyed her. The women listened without judgment, several nodding with recognition. I lost my first husband to a farming accident, one woman said quietly. Spent 2 years thinking I'd died with him. Then one morning I woke up and realized I was still breathing, still had work to do. Grief doesn't end, but it changes. Becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. That's where I am now, Martha said, learning to carry it instead of drown in it. Clara squeezed her hand. You're doing more than surviving, Martha. You're leading. That takes courage most people don't have. Across the fire, Martha saw Rowan talking with Dutch and Robert, 3 big men discussing something with serious expressions. She excused herself and wandered over, curious. Won't matter if we have water rights if we can't get our goods to market, Dutch was saying. Crowell controls the freight contracts through his connections. He could make it nearly impossible to ship anything. So we need our own freight operation, Robert replied. Pool resources, buy wagons, establish direct contracts with buyers in Cheyenne. That takes capital we don't have. Rowan glanced at Martha as she approached. What do you think? You're the one with the water rights that started all this. Martha considered. The cooperative had solved one problem, but created others. Independence was expensive. Building alternative systems to Crowell's established infrastructure would require money, organization, and sustained effort. But the alternative was falling back into dependence, into the very trap they'd just escaped. We start small, she said. 1 shared wagon, 1 contract. Prove we can do it, then expand. And we charge membership fees, nothing outrageous, but enough to build a working fund. Everyone contributes what they can. Everyone benefits proportionally. And if some can't afford the fees, Dutch asked, then they work it off, labor instead of cash. There's always work that needs doing. Martha looked at the gathered crowd, at people who'd come together out of desperation and discovered strength. We've built something here. Something worth protecting and growing, but it only works if we all commit to making it work. She's right, Robert said. This isn't just about water anymore. It's about building a real alternative to Crowell's system. And that means being willing to invest, to work, to stick together, even when it's hard. They talked through the details until the music started up again, fiddle and guitar weaving together in a lively reel that got people dancing. Martha watched from the sidelines, content to observe, until Rowan appeared at her elbow. You should dance, he said. I don't dance. Haven't in years. Then it's time to start again. He offered his hand, massive and scarred and surprisingly gentle. Martha hesitated, then took it. He led her to where couples were spinning and stepping, and despite the awkwardness of her size and his, despite being out of practice and out of place, they moved together well enough. Rowan didn't talk, didn't push, just guided her through the steps with quiet competence. Thank you, Martha said as the song ended, for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Yes, you could have. Just would have taken longer. Rowan released her hand but didn't step away. You're stronger than you know, Martha Hale. Always were. Before she could respond, children came tearing through, playing some complicated game that involved a lot of shrieking and running. The moment broke, and Rowan disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Martha standing alone with her heart doing strange things in her chest. The celebration went late into the night, and by the time Martha and Rowan made their way back to her farm, the moon had risen full and bright, turning the valley silver. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared purpose and mutual respect. Things are going to change now, Martha said as her farmhouse came into view. The cooperative, the freight operation, all of it. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building. Change is good. Means you're moving forward instead of just holding ground. Will you stay? The question came out before Martha could stop it. For the winter, I mean, to help get everything established. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. That what you want? Yes. Martha was surprised by how certain she felt. I know you prefer the high country, prefer solitude, but we work well together, and there's still so much to do. All right, Rowan said simply. I'll stay. They put up the horse and wagon, moving through familiar tasks with easy coordination. In the farmhouse, Martha lit the lamps while Rowan rebuilt the fire. The space felt different with both of them in it, smaller but also more complete, like an equation finally balanced. I'll bed down in the barn, Rowan started. No. Martha surprised herself again. It's too cold and the barn's not properly insulated yet. Take Thomas's old cot. It's not much, but it's warmer than the barn. They settled into the evening routine they'd developed over weeks of working together, Rowan maintaining the fire while Martha prepared tea, quiet companionship replacing the need for constant conversation. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility, with the sense that they stood at the edge of something new. "Martha," Rowan said suddenly, "what Crowell said today about me being your protector, he meant it as an insult, like you're weak and I'm doing charity." "I know what he meant. But that's not what this is. You understand that, right? I'm not here to save you or keep you safe or any of that nonsense. I'm here because you deserve to have someone in your corner, someone who sees what you're capable of and wants to help you achieve it." Martha looked at this mountain of a man who'd upended her life with such casual grace, who'd given her time and space and strength without asking anything in return, who'd stood beside her through confrontations and celebrations, hard work and harder choices, never once making her feel less than capable. "I know," she said softly. "And Rowan, I'm here for the same reason. You gave me a chance to remember who I was before grief and cruelty tried to convince me I was nothing. But you needed something too, I think. Needed a reason to come down from your mountain and remember that the world isn't all bad." His smile was slight but genuine. "Maybe we saved each other then." "Maybe we did." The weeks that followed the confrontation with Crowell fell into a rhythm of hard work and steady progress. The cooperative flourished as more members joined, each bringing skills and resources that strengthened the whole. They established regular meetings to coordinate planting, share equipment, and address challenges. The Women's Agricultural Society became a force unto itself, organizing seed exchanges and knowledge-sharing sessions that drew participants from across the valley. Martha found herself at the center of it all, not because she sought leadership, but because people naturally looked to her for guidance. She'd been the first to stand up to Crowell, the one who'd risked everything to prove that resistance was possible. That made her a symbol, whether she wanted to be or not. But she was learning to carry that weight. Learning that leadership wasn't about having all the answers, but about being willing to face hard questions with honesty and courage. About trusting others to contribute their strengths while you contributed yours. About building something larger than yourself and taking pride in its growth. Rowan remained her constant partner through it all. He expanded the barn, repaired outbuildings, taught Martha advanced skills in everything from tracking game to reading weather patterns. But more than that, he became her sounding board, the person she could talk through problems with in the evening when the day's work was done. They debated cooperative policies over dinner, planned spring projects while mending harnesses, and gradually built a partnership that went deeper than simple friendship. December brought the first heavy snow, blanketing the valley in white silence. Martha stood on her porch watching it fall and marveled at how different this winter felt from the last. Then, she'd been alone and hopeless, counting the days until the cold killed her or the bank took everything. Now she had purpose, community, and a future that seemed actually achievable. "Storm's coming in," Rowan said, appearing beside her with an armload of wood. "Real one, not just this dusting. We should secure the barn and bring the chickens inside the coop shelter." They worked together preparing for the storm, and when the blizzard hit that night, it was fierce and unrelenting. Wind howled around the farmhouse like a living thing, snow piling up in drifts that buried the fences. But inside they were warm and safe, the fire crackling cheerfully while wind raged outside. "This reminds me of the winter Thomas died," Martha said quietly. "We'd been snowed in for days. He went out to check the animals and came back soaked through, coughing. By morning, he had fever. 3 days later, he was gone. I'm sorry. For a long time, I blamed myself. Thought if I'd made him stay inside, if I'd been more insistent, he'd still be alive." Martha stared into the fire. "But you can't protect people from everything. Sometimes life just takes them, and all you can do is figure out how to keep living." "Is that what you're doing? Keeping living?" "No." Martha looked at him. "I'm not just surviving anymore, Rowan. I'm actually living, building something, mattering. For the first time since Thomas died, I feel like myself again, maybe even more myself than before." The storm lasted 3 days, and when it finally cleared, they emerged to a world transformed. Everything was white and pristine. the valley invisible under its blanket of snow. They dug out the barn and checked on the cooperative members, making sure everyone had survived the storm intact. Everyone had. The preparations they'd made together, the resources they'd shared, the systems they'd built, all of it had worked exactly as designed. People had food and fuel, shelter and safety. The cooperative had passed its first real test. As winter deepened, Martha realized something that both surprised and didn't surprise her. She was happy. Genuinely, honestly happy in a way she hadn't been since before Thomas's death. The farm was thriving, the cooperative was strong, and she woke each morning with purpose instead of dread. And Rowan was part of that happiness. His steady presence, his quiet strength, the way they'd learned to work together like two parts of a well-oiled machine. She didn't know what to call what existed between them. Not romance exactly, but more than friendship, partnership maybe, or something that didn't have a name because it was uniquely theirs. On Christmas Eve, the cooperative held a gathering at the schoolhouse. Everyone brought food and small gifts, and children performed a pageant that was more enthusiasm than skill. Martha sat with the women and watched Rowan help Dutch's boys build something elaborate out of snow outside, and felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was what Thomas had wanted. Not just a farm, but a community. Not just survival, but flourishing. He'd planted seeds that had taken years to sprout, but now they were growing strong and true. That night, back at the farm, Martha and Rowan sat by the fire with cups of hot cider. Outside, snow fell softly, and inside everything was warm and peaceful. "I've been thinking," Martha said carefully, "about spring, about what comes next. And I want you to stay, not just through winter, but permanently, as a partner, in the farm, in the cooperative, in all of it." She met his eyes. "I know you value your independence, your solitude, but I think maybe we're better together than apart." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "You asking me to work for you?" "No, I'm asking you to work with me. Equal partners. Your name on the deed alongside mine, decisions made together, profits shared equally. I'm asking you to help me build what Thomas started and make it into something even better. And if people talk, if they assume things about us, let them talk. I'm done living my life according to other people's expectations." Martha smiled. "Besides, what we have is more solid than most marriages I've seen. We trust each other, work well together, want the same things. That's worth more than romance or propriety." "It is," Rowan agreed. "All right, Martha Hale, I accept your partnership on one condition." "What's that?" "That you stop thinking you owe me something. This arrangement benefits me as much as you, maybe more. You gave me a reason to come down from my mountain and remember what it feels like to be part of something bigger than myself." He raised his cup in salute. "To partnership." "To partnership," Martha echoed, and they drank together while snow fell softly outside and the future stretched ahead bright with possibility. Winter released its grip on the valley slowly, reluctantly, like a miser parting with coin. The snow melted in patches through March, revealing brown earth and the first tentative shoots of new grass. Martha stood in what would soon be her garden, seeds in hand, and felt something like joy rising in her chest. This would be her first spring planting as a full partner instead of a struggling widow, her first season with real hope instead of desperate survival. Rowan was in the barn building new chicken roosts, the sound of his hammer a steady rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. They'd filed the partnership papers in February, making their arrangement legal and binding. The clerk at the land office had looked confused. Partnerships between men and women who weren't married were unusual, but he'd processed the documents without comment. Martha Hale and Rowan Pike, equal owners of 120 acres and associated water rights. It was official. The cooperative had grown to 37 members over the winter, and their first freight wagon was scheduled to make its inaugural run to Cheyenne in 2 weeks. They'd secured contracts with 3 different buyers, cutting Crowell out of the equation entirely. It was working. Everything was working, but Martha had learned not to trust easy victories, and the winter's peace felt fragile, like ice over deep water. She was proved right on a morning in early April when Clara Jennings rode up fast, her horse lathered and her face pale. "Martha, where's Rowan?" In the barn. Clara, what's wrong? Crowell's made his move. He filed a challenge with the Territorial Land Office, claiming the water rights Thomas registered were never properly validated. Says there's a technicality in the original survey, some boundary dispute that invalidates the whole claim. Martha's stomach dropped. That's not possible. Thomas fought for 2 years to get those rights recognized. I know, but Crowell's got lawyers and documentation and apparently enough political influence to get the Territorial Commissioner to review the case. There's a hearing scheduled in Cheyenne next month. If the Commissioner rules in Crowell's favor, your water rights disappear. And without those rights, the cooperative falls apart. Rowan emerged from the barn, taking in Clara's expression and Martha's white face. What happened? Clara explained again, her voice tight with anger. By the time she finished, Rowan's jaw was set hard as granite. He waited, Rowan said quietly. Waited until we'd built something worth destroying, then went after the foundation. Smart. What do? Martha asked. We can't let him win, not after everything. We fight, same as before. Rowan looked at Clara. Who else knows about this? Just came from the land office. Pettigrew showed me the filing, said he thought we deserved warning before it became public. The hearing's May 15th. We have 5 weeks. Then we use them. Martha's mind was already racing. We need the original survey documents, Thomas's claim papers, anything that proves the water rights are legitimate. And we need a lawyer, someone who understands territorial water law and won't be intimidated by Crowell's influence. I know someone, Rowan said. Woman named Catherine Marsh, practices in Laramie, specializes in land disputes. She's expensive, but she's good, and she doesn't care who she pisses off. Can you contact her? I'll write out today. Meanwhile, you start gathering documentation. Everything Thomas kept, everything the land office has on file. We build a case so solid Crowell's lawyers can't touch it. They moved into action with the coordinated efficiency of people who'd learned to work as one. Clara spread word through the cooperative, and within hours people began arriving with offers of help. Dutch McCall contributed money for the lawyers' fees. Sarah Peterson and her dairy farmers volunteered to handle Martha's farm work so she could focus on preparing for the hearing. Gus Hoffman offered to accompany them to Cheyenne as additional support. Over the next weeks, Martha lived in paperwork and legal documents. She found Thomas's original claim filing, his correspondence with the territorial surveyor, receipts and records going back to 1879. She interviewed old-timers who remembered the boundary disputes, got written statements from neighbors who'd relied on Widow's Creek for decades. Every scrap of evidence went into a growing pile that would hopefully be enough to counter whatever Crowell had manufactured. Rowan returned from Laramie with Catherine Marsh, who turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with gray-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who'd fought too many battles to be impressed by posturing. She reviewed Martha's documentation with meticulous care, asking pointed questions and taking copious notes. It's good, Catherine said after 2 days of review. The claim is solid, the survey was properly conducted, and you have documentation proving continuous beneficial use of the water rights. But here's what concerns me. Crowell wouldn't have filed this challenge unless he had something. Some angle we haven't anticipated. Men like him don't gamble on weak hands. So what do? Martha asked. We prepare for anything. I'll research every possible technicality he might exploit, every loophole in territorial water law. And you need to be ready to testify. The commissioner will want to hear directly from the claimant about the history and use of the rights. Can you do that? Stand up in front of officials and lawyers and make your case? Martha thought about the auction block, about facing down Crowell in her own yard, about building a cooperative from nothing but courage and necessity. Yes, I can do that. The weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine drilled Martha on testimony, teaching her how to answer questions clearly and concisely, how to stay calm under hostile cross-examination, how to present evidence effectively. They practiced until Martha could recite the history of her water rights in her sleep, until she knew every detail of the survey and every precedent in territorial water law. The night before they were to leave for Cheyenne, the cooperative held a gathering at Martha's farm. People brought food and encouragement, and the yard filled with the same community that had gathered to face down Crowell months earlier. Whatever happens, Dutch said, raising a cup in toast, you've already won. You built something Crowell couldn't break, brought together people who'd been divided by fear. That matters more than any hearing. But we still need to win the hearing, Clara added practically. So go to Cheyenne and show them what we're made of. They set out at dawn. Martha, Rowan, Catherine, and Gus Hoffman as their witness to the cooperative's use of the water rights. The journey took 3 days, and they arrived in Cheyenne to find a city buzzing with territorial politics and business. The hearing was scheduled in the land office, an imposing brick building that seemed designed to intimidate. Crowell was already there when they arrived, surrounded by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He smiled when he saw Martha, that same cold smile from the auction block. "Mrs. Hale, how determined of you to come all this way. Though I'm afraid you'll find it was wasted effort." "We'll see," Martha replied evenly. The hearing room was formal and austere, with the territorial commissioner, a stern man named Wallace, presiding from behind a massive desk. Crowell's lawyers presented first, laying out their challenge with slick professionalism. They claimed the original survey had missed a boundary marker, that the water rights had been granted based on incorrect property lines, and that therefore the entire claim was invalid. They had documentation too, a newly discovered survey from 1878 that supposedly showed different boundaries than the 1879 survey Thomas had used. It was impressive and official-looking, complete with seals and signatures from surveyors who were conveniently dead and couldn't be questioned. Martha's heart sank as she watched the commissioner review the documents with obvious interest. This was Crowell's angle. He'd manufactured evidence that looked legitimate enough to create doubt. And in legal disputes, doubt often favored whoever had more money and influence. But Catherine Marsh hadn't built her reputation by giving up easily. When her turn came, she systematically dismantled Crowell's case with surgical precision. She proved the 1878 survey had been discredited years ago due to surveyor incompetence, showed that Thomas's 1879 survey had been conducted by a respected professional whose other work was universally accepted, and presented testimony from multiple witnesses who'd seen the boundary markers in place since the original claim. Then she called Martha to testify. Martha stood before the commissioner and told her story, not with drama or emotion, but with simple honesty. She explained how Thomas had fought for those water rights, how he'd understood their importance for the entire valley's future, how the cooperative had grown from those rights and now sustained 37 families. She described the careful stewardship they'd exercised, the equitable distribution of water resources, the way the system had benefited everyone instead of enriching one powerful man. "Mrs. Hale," one of Crowell's lawyers interrupted during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were nearly bankrupt before Mr. Pike intervened? That you were unable to manage your own affairs, let alone regulate water rights for an entire valley?" "I was grieving," Martha said clearly. "I'd lost my husband, and I was being systematically exploited by Mr. Crowell, who manipulated my debts to steal my land. But I recovered. I learned, and I built something that serves the community instead of just enriching myself. That's the difference between his vision for the valley and ours." "Objection," the lawyer said. "Speculation about Mr. Crowell's motives." "Sustained," Commissioner Wallace said. "But I'll allow Mrs. Hale to explain the cooperative's purpose and function." So Martha did. She explained the mutual protection agreement, the shared resources, the way small holders had banded together to resist consolidation and maintain independence. She talked about crop diversity and sustainable use, about building resilience instead of extraction. And she watched the commissioner's expression shift from skeptical to thoughtful to something that might have been approval. When she finished, Catherine called Gus Hoffman to testify about the cooperative's operations, then presented documentation showing the economic benefit to the territory of maintaining diverse small holdings instead of consolidated corporate control. It was a masterful performance, turning a dry legal dispute into a question of territorial values and future development. Crowell's lawyers tried to recover, but Catherine had stolen their momentum. By the time closing arguments concluded, it was clear the hearing hadn't gone the way Crowell expected. Commissioner Wallace reviewed his notes for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. "This commission finds that the water rights granted to Thomas Hale in 1879 were properly surveyed and legally valid. The challenge based on the disputed 1878 survey is without merit, as that survey has been previously discredited and cannot form the basis for invalidating subsequent claims. Furthermore, this commission notes that the current use of said water rights through the Widows Creek Cooperative serves a legitimate public interest in promoting diverse agricultural development. The challenge is denied. The water rights remain valid and enforceable. The room erupted. Crowell's face went purple, his lawyers scrambling to request reconsideration. But Wallace banged his gavel and stood, effectively ending the hearing. It was over. They'd won. Outside the land office, Martha stood in the spring sunshine feeling dizzy with relief. Catherine was already planning their next steps, getting the ruling officially recorded, ensuring it was bulletproof against future challenges. But Martha barely heard her. All she could think was that they'd done it, faced Crowell's best attack and survived, protected the cooperative and everything they'd built. Rowan appeared at her elbow, his presence solid and reassuring. "You did good in there. Thomas would have been proud." "We did good. All of us." Martha looked at the people who'd stood with her, Catherine with her legal brilliance, Gus with his steady testimony, Rowan with his unfailing support. "I couldn't have done this alone." "No one does anything alone," Catherine said, joining them. "That's the whole point of civilization. We're stronger together than apart." They celebrated that night at a Cheyenne hotel, a modest dinner that felt like a feast. Gus told stories about the valley's early days, Catherine shared tales of other land disputes she'd fought, and Martha felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for years. The future was secure. The cooperative was safe. They could build now instead of just defend. The journey back to Red Hollow took 4 days because they stopped to share the news with cooperative members along the way. By the time they reached Martha's farm, word had spread through the entire valley. People lined up to congratulate them, to thank them, to celebrate a victory that belonged to everyone. Clara arrived with her whole family. Dutch brought his sons. Sarah Peterson and the dairy farmers came with fresh cheese and butter. Even people who weren't part of the cooperative showed up, drawn by curiosity or the simple human desire to witness something good triumphing over something corrupt. The party lasted until after dark, and when everyone finally left, Martha stood on her porch looking out at the valley she'd helped protect. The farm that had nearly been stolen was now truly hers. The water rights that Crowell had tried to invalidate were secured for generations. The community that had formed around mutual protection was strong and growing stronger. "Quite a view," Rowan said, joining her on the porch. "It is." Martha smiled. "You know what I realized today? I'm not afraid anymore. For 2 years after Thomas died, I lived in fear of losing the farm, of being alone, of failing at everything I touched. But that fear is gone. Even if Crowell tries something else, even if new challenges come, I know we can handle them." "We can," Rowan agreed. "Together." They stood in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The creek sang its endless song. And Martha Hale, who'd once stood on an auction block being sold off for pennies, felt the deep satisfaction of knowing she'd become exactly what her late husband had believed she could be. Strong, capable, unbreakable. The weeks following the victory in Cheyenne brought changes that rippled through the valley like water flowing downhill. The cooperative's membership swelled to 49 as people who'd been sitting on the fence decided that backing the winning side made sense. The freight operation expanded to include 2 wagons and regular weekly runs to Cheyenne, cutting into Crowell's profits and giving smallholders direct market access. Crowell himself had gone quiet, but Martha knew better than to think he'd given up. Men like him didn't surrender. They regrouped and adapted. She kept watch for his next move, ready for whatever came. What came surprised her. In late May, Pettigrew from the land office appeared at her door with a sealed letter. "This came through official channels, Mrs. Hale. From Mr. Crowell's attorney. I was instructed to deliver it directly to you." Martha took the letter with trepidation, but when she opened it, she found not a legal threat but a proposal. Crowell was offering to buy water access from the cooperative at fair market rates, requesting a formal contract that would guarantee supply to his downstream properties in exchange for annual fees. "He's capitulating," Martha said, showing the letter to Rowan, "actually admitting he needs what we control. Or he's looking for a way in. Once he's a client of the cooperative, he can work from the inside, find weaknesses, exploit divisions. Then we make sure there are no weaknesses to exploit. Martha read the letter again, thinking through angles and implications. We accept his offer, but on our terms. Standard rates, no special treatment, same rules that apply to everyone else. And we put Catherine Marsh on retainer to review any contracts before we sign them. They brought the proposal to the cooperative's next meeting, and the debate was fierce. Some members wanted to refuse Crowell entirely, unwilling to do business with a man who'd caused so much harm. Others saw the economic benefit of guaranteed income from a wealthy client. Eventually, they voted to accept with strict conditions. Crowell would pay premium rates as a non-member, contracts would be reviewed quarterly, and any violation of terms would result in immediate suspension of service. When Martha delivered their counterproposal, Crowell accepted without argument. The contract was signed in Catherine Marsh's Laramie office, witnessed and legally binding. And just like that, the man who tried to destroy Martha became a paying customer of the system she'd built. "This doesn't feel like victory," Clara said after the signing. "Feels like he's still getting what he wanted." "He's getting water access," Martha corrected. "But he's not getting control. That's what he really wanted, to control the valley's resources and everyone who depends on them. Now he's just another customer, subject to the same rules as everyone else. That's victory enough." Summer arrived with warmth and promise. The cooperative's gardens flourished, the shared equipment program proved wildly successful, and the Women's Agricultural Society began hosting educational workshops that drew participants from neighboring counties. Martha found herself traveling to other communities, sharing the cooperative model and helping others establish similar organizations. Everywhere she went, people asked about her story. The widow who'd been auctioned off and fought back, the woman who'd built a cooperative from nothing and defeated one of the territory's most powerful men. It made her uncomfortable at first, this transformation into a symbol. But she learned to use it, to channel people's interest into practical organizing and real change. Rowan stayed close during these travels, never pushing himself forward, but always present as support. Their partnership had deepened into something Martha couldn't quite define. More than business, more than friendship, but not quite romance either. They were partners in the truest sense, two people who'd chosen to build a life together based on mutual respect and shared purpose. One evening in July, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Martha had been thinking about something for weeks, and finally she found the courage to voice it. "Rowan, do you ever regret leaving the high country, coming down here, and getting tangled up in all this complexity?" He considered the question seriously, as he considered everything. "Sometimes I miss the quiet, the simplicity of living alone, answering to nobody, needing nothing from the world. But then I think about what we've built here, about the people we've helped, about waking up each morning with purpose beyond just survival. And I realize I don't want to go back. Even though it means dealing with people like Crowell, with politics and paperwork and endless complications. Even though." He looked at her. "You know what Thomas told me that day at the land office? When we were both filing papers and got to talking?" "What?" "He said the frontier wasn't really about land or resources or opportunity. It was about the chance to build something new, something better than what existed before. He said the real challenge wasn't surviving the wilderness, it was creating communities worth surviving for." Rowan smiled slightly. Thought he was being romantic, didn't realize he was being prophetic. Martha felt tears prick her eyes. He would have loved what we've created. The cooperative, the partnerships, all of it. He'd be so proud. He'd be proud of you for taking what he started and making it into something even better. They sat in silence as the light faded, and Martha thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the auction block to this porch, from despair to hope, from isolation to community. She'd lost so much. Thomas, her innocence, her belief that the world was fundamentally fair. But she'd gained something too, strength, purpose, the knowledge that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. As summer turned toward autumn, the cooperative celebrated its first anniversary with a harvest festival that drew people from across the territory. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, children playing while adults discussed next year's plans. Martha moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and thanks, and everywhere she looked she saw evidence of what they'd achieved together. Clara and Robert Jennings had expanded their operation and were employing 2 of their sons full-time. Dutch McCall had started a breeding program for horses using cooperative resources. Sarah Peterson's dairy had become profitable enough that she was helping other women start similar ventures. Gus Hoffman had opened a second forge. The successes multiplied and fed on each other, creating an upward spiral of prosperity that benefited everyone. Even Crowell had to acknowledge it. He appeared at the festival briefly, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the gathered crowd. When he encountered Martha, he actually tipped his hat. "Impressive, Mrs. Hale. You've accomplished something I wouldn't have thought possible." "We've accomplished it," Martha corrected. "All of us together. That's the point you never understood, Mr. Crowell. Real power comes from lifting people up, not holding them down." "Perhaps." His smile was thin. "Though I notice you're not above holding leverage when it suits you. You control the water I need, charge me premium rates, and enforce rules that benefit your members while constraining mine. That's power, Mrs. Hale. Don't pretend it's anything else." "It's power used differently," Martha replied. "Used to create equity instead of exploitation. If you don't like the terms, you're welcome to find another water source." "There is no other water source, that's why those rights matter so much. That's why I wanted them." Crowell studied her. "You won this round, congratulations. But the game isn't over, and I'm a patient man." He left without another word, and Martha watched him go with the certain knowledge that he was right. The conflict wasn't over. Probably would never be over as long as men like Crowell existed. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, she was ready. Winter arrived again, and with it came a rhythm Martha had learned to trust. Hard work and careful planning, community gatherings and quiet evenings by the fire. She and Rowan had settled into their partnership with the ease of people who understood each other deeply, who could work side by side in silence or talk for hours without running out of things to say. On Christmas Eve, the cooperative held another celebration, and Martha looked around at faces she knew and loved and realized something profound. This was her family now, not by blood or marriage, but by choice and shared struggle. These people who'd stood with her when standing was dangerous, who'd built something beautiful from collective courage. Clara approached with a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you and Rowan. From all of us." Inside was a new survey map of the valley, professionally drawn and elegantly framed. Every cooperative member's property was marked, with Widow's Creek highlighted in blue and Martha's farm at the center. At the bottom, in careful calligraphy, it read, "The Widow's Creek Cooperative, founded 1883. Built on courage, sustained by community." "It's perfect," Martha said, her voice thick. "Thank you." "You gave us something to believe in," Clara replied. "When everything said lie down and accept how things were, you stood up and demanded better. That's worth more than you know." That night, back at the farm, Martha and Rowan hung the map above the fireplace where they could see it every day. It looked right there, a testament to what they'd built and a promise of what they'd continue building. "You know what I realized today?" Martha said as they stood admiring the map. "I'm not Thomas's widow anymore. I'm just Martha, a woman who owns a farm, runs a cooperative, and lives the life she chooses instead of the one circumstances forced on her." "And what kind of life is that?" Rowan asked. "A good one. A full one. A life that matters." She smiled at him. "A life I'm grateful to share with a partner who sees me as an equal instead of something to protect or pity." "I could say the same." Rowan raised his cup. "To the life we've chosen, then, may it be long and prosperous and full of purpose." They drank together as snow began to fall outside, soft and gentle, covering the valley in fresh white. Spring would come again, bringing new challenges and new opportunities. The cooperative would grow, evolve, face obstacles and overcome them. Crowell would make his moves and they'd counter them. Life would go on in all its messy, complicated, beautiful complexity. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Martha Hale stood in her own home on her own land, surrounded by evidence of everything she'd built, partnered with a man who valued her strength instead of fearing it, and looked toward a future bright with possibility. She'd been broken once, shattered by grief and cruelty until she could barely recognize herself. But she'd found the pieces and put them back together into something stronger than before. Not the same woman who'd stood on that auction block, terrified and defeated. Someone new. Someone better. Someone who knew, deep in her bones, that she was enough, had always been enough. would always be enough. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and Martha Hale smiled, content in the knowledge that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not rescue, not redemption, not even revenge. Just the simple, profound satisfaction of becoming fully herself and building a life worth living on her own terms. That was the real victory. That was what lasted. And as she stood there with Rowan beside her and the valley stretching out below and the mountains rising strong against the winter sky, Martha understood that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more fights, more reasons to stand up and demand better, but she was ready. She'd always be ready, because she'd learned the most important lesson the frontier had to teach. Strength doesn't come from never falling down. It comes from choosing to stand back up, again and again, no matter how many times the world tries to keep you down. Martha Hale had fallen. She'd been pushed down by grief and cruelty and her own despair, but she'd risen, and she would never let anyone make her fall again.